recap after elections for a number of years. And our general game plan will be to go through and give you an overview of everything that happened on Election Day related to transit. And then we're very fortunate to be able to bring you a couple of special guests who are going to talk through from the perspectives of some individual campaigns exactly what happened with their campaign, what went to voters, and how they ultimately were successful. Let me just say a couple quick housekeeping words here. First is that we do welcome your questions and comments. So throughout the webinar, you will see a tab called Questions where you can send your queries for our panelists. At the end of the program, I will take those questions and pose them out to our group. And anything that we aren't able to get to on the broadcast, we'll be sure to get back to you as well. CFTE runs a webinar series. In fact, throughout the course of 2016, we partnered with our friends at NAPTA on a 6-part training series that are all, those webinars are all recorded and available for free on our website. So if you want to dig deeper into some of the specific content on campaigns and transit ballot measures, I encourage you to take a look at that. Let me start by introducing our panelists, and then I'll kick off and give you the overview of the election results, and we'll go from there. Our first speaker after me will be Abigail Dorr. She's with Mass Transit Now, which is a Seattle-based component of the Transportation Choices Coalition, where Abigail leads advocacy programs. She was a key leader in the winning ST3 campaign in Seattle that has garnered so much attention, and I know you'll all be excited to hear the details of. Prior to that, she's also run successful campaigns in the Seattle area. In 2014, she was campaign manager for the Yes for Seattle Transit race, and previously the Seattle Parks for All initiative, so lots of good experience there. And then we'll hear from Addison Pollock. Addison is the coordinator of the Indiana Citizens Alliance for Transit. He was heavily involved in the winning campaign in Indianapolis this year. His organization, Help by Design, is part of a coalition of partners working to ensure communities have neighborhoods, public space, and transportation that promote healthy living. So two great transportation ballot measure experts to walk you through how they were successful with their races. Before we turn to them, let me give you the big picture of where we are after election 2016 for transit ballot measures. I guess the headline that probably won't come as news to many of you is that 2016 was a historic year. We had a record number of measures on ballots. We had a record amount of investment generated by those ballots, and we maintained our consistently strong approval rate. So you can see the numbers there on your screen. 71% of all ballot measures for public transportation that went to voters this year were approved. That happens to be the exact average for the races that we've been measuring since 2000. So over 16 years now, 71% of the time these measures have been successful, and this year was perfectly in line with that. We had measures in 23 different states across the year. I'll show you a map of that in just a second. And we had 77 total measures, which is a record, and a record by a substantial amount in terms of just the volume of ballot measures that were out there. And the estimated transit investment, and this is always a challenging number because we're working with long-term estimates and the like, but approximately $170 billion in transit specific, so not all transportation components, but just the transit components of these measures, around $170 billion, which is remarkable. And you will see as we go through and look at the individual races that were won around the country, and certainly the two that we're going to highlight in Indianapolis and Seattle, that several of these measures were major packages, and in more senses than just major in terms of the dollar amount generated, but really transformational initiatives and advancing visions for a completely new or expanded transit future in lots of regions around the country. Here's the sense of the geography of what we're talking about. As I mentioned, Again, 77 measures across 23 different states. What I think you can see here is that this is a national phenomenon, so it is not restricted to one region of the country. When CFT first began monitoring these measures, we would see the map skewed much more to the western part of the United States, where ballot measures are more common. But as communities have realized the potential and the success rate with voters, we've seen steady eastward expansion of that. And if you think about the electoral map, the electoral college map for the presidential race, if you overlaid those two things, what you would see is that of the 23 states that had ballot measures over the course of 2016, 14 of those states went for President-elect Trump and 9 for Hillary Clinton. Just, again, a crude measure, but one way of demonstrating that these ballot campaigns were in all sorts of geographies and political geographies. Now I want to take a look at the types of measures that went to voters. One of the most important things to keep in mind when you consider this universe of ballot measures is that we're talking almost exclusively about measures that directly affect funding. These are largely tax measures, although we do have some advisory measures, but even those advisory measures or those constitutional amendment campaigns that we'll talk about in just a minute, even those, while they're not directly approving a tax, they are almost always related to fiscal policy at the local or state level. So it is significant when we think about that 71% win rate to realize that we're talking about local taxes here, which obviously can be pretty controversial. You can see the breakdown across 2016. 40% of the measures in the sales tax category, 34% in the property tax category. The others, much smaller numbers spread across the different categories that you see there. You'll note that I added this statistic there underneath each one of the the overall amounts that says win and then a percentage number. What that's a representation of is the fact that that's the percentage of the 40%, for instance, in sales tax. 61% of the 40% were successful. Just to give you a little bit of a gauge of the relative successfulness of any one of these particular tools. And I will say that the overall breakdown, the 40%, 30% other breakdown in 2016 holds pretty clear to the historic pattern that we've seen over the previous 15 years of monitoring these elections. That's been pretty consistent. And part of that reason, or part of the reason for that rather, is that most communities don't have a lot of options in terms of what tool they use. They're given a specific set of enabling legislation or a specific set of constitutional restrictions that they're working in, so they either have to choose sales tax or they have to choose property taxes. But we are seeing greater diversity, more places looking at different fees and different sorts of options, and the overall number of these measures, as noted before, is growing. I think what you can intuit from seeing the winning percentages is that it's challenging to win the sales and property tax campaigns, but even those races, which are very clearly at the local level about how much tax people pay, the winning percentage is very strong. Now, certainly historically, the winning percentage for those other categories is not 100%. It happened to be for a number of them this year, but we have seen similar sorts of breakdowns in years past. So this chart just gives you a clear representation of the trend lines and the specific successful rates on a year-over-year, going back to 2000 when we first started measuring and monitoring these campaigns. I think what this chart demonstrates, as I mentioned before, 71% in 2016, 71% 2016, 71% overall across all of those years. While there's some variation up and down year to year, there's a very consistent record of success at the ballot box when you look at these measures. It's really remarkable that over the last 16 years of ballot measures, totaling hundreds, over 600 measures, only one year has had a rate below 50%, and most years, virtually all years, been well over that. And reflect for a second on the fact that that same period of time, that same 16-year span, has been an era largely dominated by political polarization, advancing partisanship, and sharp controversies at the local level, federal level in fact, over taxation and the role of government. So I think this runs counter to a lot of the narratives that have been put together about the state of politics today, particularly as it relates to people's desire for this kind of investment in public transportation. If you look at the overall number of measures, we broke this out in two different charts because it's a little bit apples and oranges to look at even numbered years versus odd numbered years. There's just so many more elections when you're on cycle in most states. Again, just to give you a sense of the fact that the activity here has been increasing. I mentioned before 2016 is a new high water mark for us, and by a wide margin. You can see that there are 15 more measures that were on ballots than the previous high, which was in 2012, and we're setting records on a fairly consistent basis now. So 2012 was the previous high water mark. 2015 last year was the highest number of off-cycle ballot measure that we'd seen, at 77 on the ballot for a record this year. So the trend line in terms of the number of measures is steadily increasing. And again, I think that's partly because the geography of the places who are looking to ballot measures as a tool is growing. And I think the awareness of the success rate is also growing. Clearly, too, there's difficulty in acquiring the sorts of resources from states and Washington to move these projects forward. So it really has become a bit of a locally led phenomenon, so that there may ultimately be state and federal dollars in the projects, but this demonstration of political and fiscal will through the ballot box becomes a critical step for many projects around the country. Now what I'd like to do is take you through in fairly rapid-fire fashion. I'm not going to go into details about all these campaigns. There's simply too many of them for the time we have. But just to want to give you a sense of where things were on ballots and generally what happened, I will point you back to our website at cft.org if you want more details on exactly what was on the ballot in these places. You can get all the details there. But we'll start in Arizona and sort of go alphabetically forward. Flagstaff, Arizona approved a 10-year sales tax renewal with 71% of the voters in Flagstaff in favor. So a nice victory for renewal measure there. California warrants special attention. Before I talk about any of the individual measures, let me just say that California had 17 different measures on ballots across the state this year. And that's really interesting when you consider that California is also a state that requires a supermajority for passage of these taxation measures. So you're talking about 67% in favor in order to win. So the bar is extremely high. Nevertheless, about 60% of measures on ballots in California passed. And if you made that just a simple majority, virtually all of them would have passed. A few outliers, but most all of those measures would have passed. So very strong support in California. Naturally, most of the attention has gone to Measure M in Los Angeles, which was a significant major package, $120 billion package of investment, largely in transit, although some of it was in other modes as well. But about $100 billion of that total into new public transportation investment. 70% in favor there in Los Angeles. And the package, just in broad terms, renewed Measure R, which was an existing sales tax that had been in place there for transit and transportation investment, and then added an additional half-cent sales tax on top of that. So this becomes, at least in terms of the measures that we have monitored over the course of the last 16 years, the single biggest package that has passed. If you narrow the scope a little bit and look at the Bay Area in California, you can see some of the measures there. The one I should have mentioned this earlier, the ones that are noted in green were all measures that passed. A couple of the significant ones here. In the Bay Area, a bond package, a multi-county bond package for BART, the Regional Transit Agency, worth about $3.5 billion, passed also with about 70% of the vote there. One of the losses that we looked at occurred in San Francisco, where there was a transportation housing combo measure. The fund to create the mechanism to distribute the funds was adopted, but the tax itself narrowly lost. So a bit of a setback there in San Francisco, but as you can see, generally speaking, whether we're talking about county sales tax measures or the BART bond package, broad success in California generally and the Bay Area specifically. No surprise given some of the challenges that the state is dealing with in terms of transit needs and infrastructure deficits and managing growth in those areas. Turning to Colorado, you can see 3 measures on the ballot there. In Boulder, Colorado, we saw a sales tax renewal pass. And I should mention that when you look at these measures, they tend to fall in 2 main categories, regardless of whether it's a sales or property tax or other kind of measure. They're new levies and then they're renewals. So a number of these measures are renewals. Historically, we've seen renewals tend to pass at a little bit higher level even than ballot measures generally, which probably isn't a surprise. But Boulder did approve a sales tax renewal. And then in another part of the state, and I'm not, apologies to my friends in Colorado, I'm not entirely sure exactly how the county's name is pronounced, but in Ruick County, Colorado, we saw the nation's first excise tax with a dedication, excise tax on retail marijuana dedicated for a variety of public purposes, but with a specific set aside for public transportation. And of course, while we weren't monitoring them directly, a number of other marijuana legalization measures were adopted around the country, so this may be something that we begin to see at the local level in other places going forward. Florida, the next state, Broward County, we have a setback there where a sales tax measure was defeated. It was actually a 2-part ballot question there, where there was a sales tax and then a separate piece for an infrastructure tax. One passed, the other failed, but both were needed to pass in order for implementation. So that ultimately went down to defeat in Broward County. And interestingly, this extends a challenge with ballot measures that we have seen over a number of years in the state of Florida. Florida, unfortunately, is a real outlier in terms of passage of these ballot measures for public transportation, running well behind national averages. So something that we have looked at and will continue to look at in the state of Florida. Georgia, many of you, if you've been involved at all in these ballot measure issues over time, will recall that the Atlanta region, a very large multi-county region, had a spectacular defeat at the ballot box a few years back. What we have seen since then is sort of a steady rebounding by taking a more incremental and piecemeal approach. So what we had on ballots in November was a half-cent sales tax for transit in the city of Atlanta, as well as separate transportation measures, but non-transit transportation measures in Fulton County outside the city of Atlanta, as well as a separate levy inside the city of Atlanta that was transportation infrastructure, but not transit. So all 3 of those measures passed. This builds on the success of Clayton County, which sits immediately south of the city of Atlanta, that had a positive vote a couple years ago to extend MARTA into Clayton County. In order to do this, though, the state has played a big role where the state legislature had to get involved and provide specific new authorities to divide Fulton County into jurisdictions that would allow the city to go separately from the overall county. And I think that there's a lesson there for a lot of places in terms of a growing state role, as well as taking these mega regions and really breaking them down into the passable pieces. But the pieces that have been adopted steadily now over the last few years after that defeat add up to major new investment in transit and infrastructure generally, really, in Atlanta. So sort of an interesting Plan B story there about what's happened in the Atlanta region. Illinois is one of 2 states that had constitutional amendments on ballots related to the state's transportation budget and focusing on restricting transportation revenues, largely gas tax revenues, for the purposes of transportation, the so-called transportation lockbox measures. The measure in Illinois passed handily to keep transportation revenues in transportation projects in the state. One of the real marquee wins anywhere in the country garnered quite a bit of media attention, and a lot of us in transportation focused on it a good bit over the last few years, is in Marion County in Indianapolis. I'm going to let Addison explain all those details, but nevertheless, very big win. That also, like Georgia, required a significant state advocacy effort that preceded the vote. So we'll look forward to hearing more details from Addison on that. Maine had a statewide $100 million state bond measure, and this really continues a trend in the state of Maine and a few other New England states where statewide bond measures have passed handily by large margins with public transportation investment included in those packages. In Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., in Prince George's County, a $200 million bond package was adopted. It does a number of things in the transportation world, but was specifically designed to provide needed county-level support for the new Purple Line project there in the Washington region. Michigan. Michigan is always a big state for ballot measures, a rich history in the state with lots of communities of all sizes going to the ballot box. 18 different measures in Michigan went to voters in 2016. So our list today only focuses on Election Day, but if you go back and look through the broader list, you'll see lots of measures and lots of wins across the state. On Election Day itself, there was an easy property tax victory in Eaton County, Michigan, but that was overshadowed in many ways by what I would characterize as a very disappointing regional defeat in the Detroit area, in a 4-county area in southeast Michigan. This was a much anticipated vote. Again, one that had the fingerprints of state action all over it in terms of the creation of a regional authority and some specific parameters around going to the voters. Ultimately came up short. Very interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of analysis by us and others looking at the breakdown of the vote in those 4 counties and what that might suggest. I think it does indicate, generally speaking, the difficulty of multiple county measures. Abigail has a happier story in Seattle looking multi-county, but in many places those tend to be really hard to pass. But the vote was extremely close, and one of the large trends, if you look at all of these measures, the small subset that went down to defeat, many cases we see very close races, very narrow margins. So while these measures pass most of the time, they don't often pass with huge majorities in support, which I think makes learning the best practice lessons of the campaigns particularly important. Moving over to New Jersey, this was the other state that had a transportation lockbox amendment on the ballot, and it was successful in New Jersey. North Carolina, home to another one of our really high-profile races of the year. In Wake County, North Carolina, a sales tax measure was adopted. This really completes a 3-county effort. Previously you saw victories in Orange County, North Carolina, and Durham County, North Carolina, now in Wake. Those are the 3 counties that make up the Research Triangle region of the state, very fast growing. A lot of support from various sectors behind the measure in Wake County. This will put in place a half-cent sales tax that will fund a $2.3 billion regional transportation plan. Wake had been the outlier and points to the importance of other kinds of political activity where some electoral changes to the county commission were required in order to actually move this question directly to voters, but significant victory there. And then the other advance in the state was in the city of Greensboro, North Carolina, where a $126 million bond package was approved by voters. Turning to Ohio, we went 3 for 4 in Ohio, 3 victories of 4 measures on the ballots. The 3 winners you'll see in Franklin County, 0.25% sales tax renewal, in Lucas County, a 10-year renewal of a property tax levy, and in Stark County, a 10-year sales tax renewal. So renewals they're spread across the state of Ohio. Turning to Oregon, this is an interesting measure. Previously, there had been an election in this community that required voters to approve any attempt to expand the light rail system. And at the time, the adoption of that charter amendment to require a public vote was seen by us and others, frankly, as an attempt to derail the entire effort and as an anti-transit initiative generally. But despite that, turns out the tactic did not work, as voters ultimately okayed this advisory measure for the light rail expansion. South Carolina, a very hard-fought measure in Charleston County, South Carolina. This was a half-cent sales tax measure, very narrowly approved after a lot of debate. $1.89 billion package there in Charleston, South Carolina. In the state of Texas, we had 2 advisory measures. The city of Lago Vista was asked about staying in the Capital Metro Transit Authority, approved that measure. Richland Hill, an interesting one, just earlier this year, earlier in 2016, voters went to the voting booth and chose to stay in the regional system there. It was put back on the ballot again this November and had the opposite result. So we've seen a series of advisory measures in Texas related to joining or remaining within these systems, and split decision there in Texas this year. Utah is another state that has seen a number of measures over the years. If you've been on other CFT broadcasts, we've been fortunate to have campaign leaders from across Utah talk about their record of success and some of the state activity that has led even more counties across the state of Utah to go to the voters to pursue sales tax measures to support transit. Split decision this year. This comes on the heels of some victories in the last cycle, but Summit County in the broader Salt Lake region approved a measure. Defeat at the other end of the state in Washington County for a similar sales tax measure, a 0.25% sales tax measure in both cases. The Washington County vote was a very narrow loss, 52-48 there, but again, strong record of overall success in Utah over the last few years, but a split decision this year. Virginia. Virginia is interesting. 2 wins for bonds in Northern Virginia in the Washington, D.C. Region. 58.8 million bond package in Arlington was adopted by voters. 120 million bond package in neighboring Fairfax County, also adopted by voters, in both cases by wide margins. A really unfortunate setback in the Virginia Beach area, where there was an advisory measure that related to the expansion of the Tide light rail system into Virginia Beach that had previously been approved by voters. There was a push to put it back on the ballot, and it came up short this year. Was one of the more negative races around the country as it relates to transit. I'm going to talk in just a second sort of about some of the larger things that we saw, but this was one of the tougher races with some particularly negative press around light rail there in the Virginia Beach area in Tidewater, Virginia. Washington State, again, this is where I'm going to defer to Abigail with her expertise. I'll just note that the state is probably one of a small number, along with California and Michigan, that has a really impressive record of success with voters for transit, and really is endemic of something that I think is happening in a lot of places. So if you look at the debate over the Seattle measure, it was less about whether we want transit, it was more around how much do we need and how fast can we build it. So Washington continuing to be a real leader there. I'll also say we had a really nice bounce back in Spokane. They had in 2015 a narrow loss where a sales tax increase went down very narrowly, 49-51. They came back just a year later and were successful this year, 55-45 in Spokane. And again, that I think speaks to another trend that we've seen, which is in a lot of communities, particularly in areas where these measures are a bit more controversial, we find it not uncommon to see a measure go down before it's brought back and maybe retooled a little bit, and the coalition work deepened a bit and ultimately meets with success. And then the last state I'll talk about here is the state of Wyoming, where there was a narrow sales tax loss, a proposed penny sales tax measure for public transportation that went down 53-42. So what are we talking about in terms of the trends that we're seeing and what might be next? Let me just briefly touch on a few things. One, clearly we're seeing growing use of ballot measures as a political and fiscal tool. As I just mentioned a second ago in talking about Seattle, I think even beyond that one region, we're seeing the debate shift to be less about whether communities need or want public transportation and more about what can they build, how much should they build, and when can it be provided. A third trend that we're clearly seeing is growing pressure on the states, both in terms of states to match the will that's demonstrated by locals at the ballot box to provide funding, but also pressure on states to provide more and better enabling legislation to local communities who want to take this route to additional investment. And I think that's only going to continue as more people sort of understand what transpired across the country this year. We've also seen the growing sophistication of campaigns, very diverse landscape out there. A big part of what we try to do at CFTE is think about these campaigns, try to understand what works and what doesn't, and pass along those best practices and those models for other communities around the country. And we're clearly seeing steps forward in the sophistication level of these campaigns. And then lastly, I think it sends a broader message to policymakers in Washington, D.C. A lot of talk now about a potential infrastructure package and concerns about what the contours of that might be and how that might operate. I think the message, even setting the infrastructure package aside, is that all levels of government are needed here, that locals are leading, but they definitely want to see continued support from Washington and support for transit specifically in packages that may be rolled out. Before I turn it over to Abigail, let me just say that there are some questions that I think we're going to be focusing on a great deal at CFTE. One is the question of where did the votes come from? I think we have a very interesting electoral landscape this year where we have a presidential election, congressional elections, these transit ballot measures, to really look at those regions, break it down, try to understand where the pro-transit votes came from and what that perhaps suggests politically. Secondly, we clearly recognize this phenomenon of very narrow losses, and part of the research question looking at the campaigns will be thinking harder about what the keys to overcoming those narrow losses are. And then lastly, what are the realities of leverage, both in terms of the financial leverage that these measures bring, what's that dollar amount actually look like, what does that mean, but also the political leverage in terms of does it make us more competitive for state and federal funding, does it encourage state and federal players to support these measures. And as always, the focus at CFT is how do we win these things, and I'll give you just a 2-second commercial, which is every year following major election cycles we have a debriefing conference called the Transit Initiatives and Communities Conference. This year, well, actually next calendar year in May 21-23, we're going to be visiting the folks in Seattle to take a hard look at ST3 and the other history of successful races there, and want to encourage people who are thinking about their own races in 2018, 2017, 2019, to consider joining us for a real deep dive into what makes for a successful ballot measure. So that's my overview. Now I'm going to turn it over to Abigail to give us some of the background on their fantastic success in Seattle and across the state of Washington. Abigail.
Hi. I'm just going to pull up. Okay. I think we're good. So my name is Abigail. I'm the Advocacy Director for Transportation Choices Coalition. I took a leave, sort of, to run the campaign, and I'm just now back at Transportation Choices. So it's good to be with you, and thank you for having me. So this is, we won $54 billion, yay. So Sound Transit 3 is, I'm starting out with like a little bit of a background and then what our campaign strategy and plan was. So Sound Transit is the transit agency that runs regional commuter rail. You can see over here, regional commuter rail, link light rail, and a regional bus service. I don't know if you can see this part. And a regional bus service. So Sound Transit has and I'll show you the district. So Sound Transit was created and approved by voters first in 1996, that funded the Central line of light rail, which opened in 2009, and about 26 routes of regional bus service. Sound Transit, we went back to the ballot in 2008. Actually, we went back to the ballot in 2007 and lost, and then won in 2008. To extend the light rail even further. So right now there's about 20 miles of light rail. 2 stations opened in March, and an additional station opened this September, and ridership has been through the roof this year, which is excellent. Another about 30 miles of light rail are currently under construction and are funded, and Sound Transit, I'll talk a little bit about what we were funding in this package. So the Sound Transit District is the urban parts of King, Snohomish, and Pierce County. About 2.5 million people live in this district, and there's about 1.7 million registered voters, and I'll walk through that a little bit as well. So Sound Transit 3 is a ballot measure that I made this in the past. So it went to voters on November 8th. It's the 3rd phase of building out Sound Transit's long-range plan. And why were we pursuing this? I think a lot of you probably know why, but 1,800,000 people are expected to move to this region in the next 25 years. And a lot of that growth is happening in Seattle, but also in the other urbanized areas in the community. So Tacoma and Everett, some of the smaller cities, will experience even more growth than the largest city here. And then congestion is terrible here, and as more people are coming to our region, it just continues to get worse. This is a message that we used a lot on the campaign. What does it take to move 800 people? And actually, if you go and see our ads, I'll show you them. We won't be able to watch them here, but you'll be able to go online. Is one thing that pulled really well was a single light rail line can move 16,000 people per hour, when a single general purpose freeway lane can move just 2,000, and this sort of demonstrates that need. So this package would fund, build out our light rail system. It will add 62 miles of light rail, bringing our total system to 116 miles. In total, we'll have about 30 more stations. This also funds bus rapid transit on I-405, one of the corridors, 522, and then we'll improve our commuter rail service as well. As Jason talked a little bit about, the project delivery timelines was certainly a big, maybe like a concern from folks, is that, so the package is $54 billion, and it's funded through motor vehicle. 27 billion of that comes from motor vehicle excise tax, sales tax, and a smallish property tax. And the rest of the funding is from bonding and grant revenue, assumed revenue from the federal government. And the $54 billion is in year of expenditure dollars. So that's the way that the agency determined was the most straightforward way of communicating how much the cost of the package would look like. So the cost was a big feature of the campaign, you could say, from opposition, but also the timeline. This type of transit takes a long time to build, and being straightforward and communicative about that with our voters was really important. And the agency did a lot of public feedback. They spent 3 years putting this package together and getting authority from the state legislature, and then in drafting the package, it is a large geographic area, and that sort of some of how the revenue is distributed has some strict requirements in where the revenue is generated and where it's expensed in terms of building the package. And then they also did a pretty comprehensive public outreach process. So they spent all of this, pretty much all of April, doing community engagement and public feedback. And they collected about 40,000 comments from the public. And overwhelmingly what they heard wasn't really the cost was what was concerning people, but how long it would take. It wasn't about selling. People were bought in on transit, but the timeline is what really concerned people. So the agency worked really hard to shave off a few years on each of the projects, and I think we'll still have some work to do to speed some things up. But with the package that passed in 2008 and with this package, people will see station openings around the region every 4 or 5 years for the next 25 years, which is pretty exciting. And jobs, this was very compelling in terms of building our coalition. I think environmental groups, but and this is actually probably more, but there will be 44 million new construction labor hours with this job or with this project, a 34% increase in operator jobs, and then just connecting our region over transit is critical for economic vitality. Let's see, who is our opposition? So the Seattle Times has long not been the supporter of transit. They and we were expecting this from the beginning. They wrote 10 editorials signaling. Well, they wrote 9 editorials signaling their opposition prior to their actual editorial encouraging voters to vote no. An organized group from really centralized in Bellevue and around a Bellevue developer. He personally put in about $350,000 to oppose this measure, and a small group of sort of like a neighborhood group who was opposed to having light rail, which actually was never going. It wasn't even in the package. There's a study for it in the package. Didn't want light rail on a formerly heavy rail corridor that was made into a trail. So they sort of organized with Kemper and the opposition. So what was our path to win? So there's 1.7 million registered. There are 1.7 million registered voters. Washington State is all vote by mail, and so turnout is in this election cycle is really high for us. I think we've known in the past we've gone to the ballot in non-presidential election years, and it has never proved successful for us to do that. High turnout certainly benefits us as younger voters are participating, and I think it's just better for democracy as well if more people are voting on that. We're the last item on the ballot, and so each county runs their separate voter rolls, and that we're in different places in each county. So many people don't make it to the bottom of the ballot. We're trending right now at about 6% drop-off, so this is predicting what our win number was back in March when we were getting things together. So about 1.2 million people actually voted on this measure, so 50% plus 0.1% of that is 636,088 is how many votes we need. And there's about 200,000 ballots that have yet to be counted, and we're at about that number, so that's pretty good. So what was our timeline? In May, we began this is our back-out calendar that we developed months ago, but in May, we started our steering committee. We began organizing, collecting endorsements. Sound Transit, the Sound Transit Board voted to place the ballot on the measure in late June, so we had laid some groundwork early on. I started on the 23rd, was the date that I started in my role, and started hiring staff. We collected, we convened tables around the regions of stakeholders to build supports at both the grassroots and grass tops levels. Let's see. We finalized our communications, our outreach and field plan, and our paid media plan by July, and continued that base building and outreach and endorsement collection. August, we made our media buy. We hired our full-time campaign team by the end of August, and began to do our voter contact, our direct voter contact work. In September, that continued. October, November, we won. So our overall strategy was to build a broad coalition. I am like unbelievably proud of how vast both our endorsement list was, but who we engaged in the campaign. It's pretty awesome to be a part of a coalition that is made up of people who don't often work together or are on the same team. So we had labor. The labor community gave so much. They gave time and money to the campaign. They gave more money to this campaign than any transportation, and this includes roads packages, ever. They gave about $1 million to the campaign in total. And it's really, I think, unique to see the building trades community stand with environmentalists and social justice groups and business groups, and we just sort of had everybody at the table. And I think that is a really big part of our success, was the relationship building and the broad coalition that we built. We assumed that Democratic turnout would be really high, so our intention was not to spend too many resources on turning on the base, but instead to prioritize reaching our soft supporters, and I'll go into that a little bit. We also were really deliberate about communicating regional and local projects and benefits. So sort of we had regionally focused messages depending on for our mail and TV and online communications, and our field communications were all targeted towards, had messages that were tailored towards the community that we were reaching. And then inform voters broadly about the vision. It's we had a group last night, and somebody said, you know, it's all the opposition had to do was to be anti-tax, and it was a lot of money. It's easy to do that, but we had to sell a vision, right? We had to sell light rail and the vision for the future, and that's a much harder task, and I think we did it pretty darn well. So who are our voters? I talked a little bit about this earlier, but our base support. So, and if we were to look at the 1.7 million people who, or the 1.2 million people who are likely to vote on this, we assume our base support are high propensity voters. They're strong, lean, and likely Dems, and this is all based on polling and research we've done, and have a low defector score, and I'll go into that in a second. So we didn't intend to spend a lot of time communicating with the base supporters, and I'll show you how we ended up communicating with each of these groups. And then we have a persuasion universe. So the ATU, and I'm sure many of you have worked with them, with their transit score, is we've used in past campaigns and past measures to determine who our support was through a transit score, which I think is very helpful in an off-year election when you want to like really dig deep and getting supporters out instead of turning a persuasion universe. So we worked with a group that did some modeling for us. So we had conducted 3,000 interviews through a push-poll to determine who exactly are our soft support. We did a lot of research. We did polling in July or in June, and then we did two tracking polls in between September and November. And pretty much all of them said the same thing. Our strong support are strong Democrats. Our soft supporters are generally women. And so using this modeling, we were able to give everybody in our voter universe a score on their likelihood to be a defector. So like if we communicated that with them, they were more likely to be persuaded to support what we were doing. 80% of that universe are women, so ensuring that we have communications that reflect or who our women are who our communicators are. I think that's a pretty like unique and interesting use of that research as well. And then get out the vote universe. So our low propensity based supporters are who we spend a lot of time on doing and resources doing our get out the vote. This is how we phased the work. So we spent very little in phase 1 and phase 2. Most of our phase 2 expenses were to fund projects in phase 3. So phase 3 was through election day. And early on, we raised enough money to get things going, to hire staff. And really phase 1 and 2 were to base build community relationships, and raise money. And phase 3 was go time. It's when we spent all of that money that we raised. And we raised about $3.7 million for the campaign. And how we spent it was we spent $305,000 on field. Most of that was for staffing resources. We had 5 field organizers on the ground all around the region. We had some in each. We had 3 organizers in King County, the biggest county, and then 1 in each of the farther to reach counties as well, who led multiple phone banks a week. We started off with a large kickoff in each area, sort of tailoring each event in each community. So in Seattle, our kickoff was at a nightclub. We had about 300 people show up to our kickoff there, and then that started all of our field and outreach programming. So phone banking, doorbelling, labor was a great partner on all of this. And actually the best success we've had, I mean, we called 255,000, made 255,000 calls on the campaign, and largely that was due to our partners showing up, and from labor and social justice and environmental groups all, and business hosting spaces to fill phone banks, which was great. Our mail program, we sent 11 mail pieces, and I'll go into who we spend that to, but and our online budget, and then most of our budget went to broadcast and cable advertising. So our online advertising, we did IP matching with our persuasion list, but mostly we were targeting our Get Out the Vote universe and our persuasion universe in our online advertising. Our TV and broadcast goes to everybody. Everybody will see it, our opponents, our base, our persuasion universe. The direct mail, we made the strategic decision to send the direct mail just to that persuasion universe. We trusted the modeling, and I think it paid off in the end that we did that. Our field phones, we spent really most of the time had volunteers calling our persuasion universe. That we got through that list about 1.5 times, and then we did hired a paid call center to help with our GeoTV universe with some extra money we had in the end. So our total budget was about $3.644 million. 85% of that was in direct voter contact. This is pretty typical for how campaigns, research, and fundraising should be spent. And we were approved. Right now, we still, as I said earlier, Washington's all vote by mail, so we don't actually know the final results on election night, which can be a little frustrating. So there's about 200,000 ballots left to count, but we are certainly on track to be approved, which is great. We're at about 54% right now. Oops. And so our TV advertising, I can't show you these videos, but you can go online they're all on YouTube. So one of them is a longer video. It's about 3 minutes that we played at all of our kickoffs and circulated around the internet. And then the Where Will SC3 Take You is one of the early ads we did just for online. So to sort of rile up the base a little bit. And then the third piece, we actually made 4, I think we did 6 ads and then did ad testing on all of them to see which performed best. And this is one ad that I don't remember which one it is, but it's a good one. We did video online advertising that we started sort of slow and ramped up to week 1, which was election week. Our TV communications, and we actually ended up raising enough money to add an earlier money that we added a 5th week on this as well. So we were intentional about consolidating our resources and saving them to the end and using them in the last 5 weeks when we knew things would get heated. And then our other online advertising opportunities that we took advantage of, you can geo-target where the advertising is spent, and it's very affordable and a good way of doing that. So we did, or when there was a Huskies game or a Seahawks game, or a Sounders game, soccer is very big here, we had targeted ads for stadium goers in the geographic area around the stadium. When we had a station opening, we did targeted ads around that, and we had received a bunch of endorsements from some communities around Bellevue and Redmond and Issaquah, and we did some targeted advertising around there. I said earlier we did 11 mail pieces. We did one early on, and this is the first one we did. Sound Transit is actually also required by law to send out a mass transit guide, so we assumed that they would send it out a few weeks before ballots were sent, and did another piece to complement that piece as well, or to complement when we assumed that piece would be mailed. We also did, and I don't have any photos of it here, we worked with one of our partners, One America, who's the state's largest immigrant and refugee rights organization, and we did some translated mail to Spanish, Somali, Punjabi, Korean, Chinese, and Vietnamese. We did, one of my favorites, we have this cool die cut piece that is fun. And then the last week we got a little extra money. We raised a little extra money and did a larger universe than just our persuasion universe to neighborhood specifics in Seattle. So in West Seattle, a community that's sort of been hungry for light rail for a long time, we did a targeted piece that said, light rail is finally coming. And I don't have a picture of that piece. But it was compelling for people to see maps, so people's faces, bright colors, and showing our endorsements was what we knew would pull well. Yay, and these are the election results again. And this is where, and this data is not up to date today, but it's as of election night, and a little bit after in the northern and southern counties. But you can see that our strong support comes from the more urban places. Tacoma isn't big enough to carry all of Pierce County down there. And you can see like a little green in one of the larger precincts down there. That's Joint Base Lewis McChord, and there's an extension that would extend there for Sounder, a very popular service through Pierce County and South King County. And then Seattle was at, they're at 70% of support. Redmond, which is where Microsoft's campus is, was at 59%, which is really the strongest we've done. We did, and Tacoma is at about 59% as well. Yeah, and you can see where the cities are as well. So that's it. That's what I have for you. I'm really proud of what we accomplished. I think it would have been, I think campaigns do matter, and I think there was a sort of like a funny measure on the ballot 2 years ago that some neighborhood activists put together that was an unfunded monorail extension. We have sort of like a strange transit history here in Seattle. But the monorail was sort of a failed project that wasn't ever fully funded, and some people went to the ballot, and it went down at 80%. And I think voters are smart, and voters listen to what community leaders say, and I think what we did made a difference in getting this passed in terms of the coalitions that we built and the money and how we spent these resources. I think we did it very wisely.
Great. Thanks, Abigail. That was terrific. Really good stuff and fascinating story out of the Seattle region. I'm sure we'll have some questions. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. I know we're at the top of the hour. We are going to run the webinar beyond this. We've got some great information from Indianapolis. For anyone who can't stay with us for the complete program, the full webinar will be available on our website with video and audio. But do stay with us if you possibly can. And let me turn it over to Addison. Addison, tell us about Marion County and Indianapolis.
Definitely. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone, for having us this afternoon. So I'm going to review, I'm Addison Pollock. I'm with an organization called Health by Design. I'll get into kind of what we are in a second here, but I'm going to give you a quick overview, a really high-level overview of the Marion County Transit Referendum and the entire campaign process that has been ongoing and unfolding for several years. So just to give you a quick background of who I am and who I work for. I work with Health by Design. We are a nonprofit, which is actually a diverse coalition of partners that works across the state of Indiana. We're based in Indianapolis, but we work to ensure that communities have transportation infrastructure options and different opportunities for healthy living and physical activity in their communities. So we try to make the healthy choice the easy choice through environmental design practices. So to accomplish that mission, we have 4 branded work groups. We have the Indiana Citizens Alliance for Transit, which is our transit initiative, obviously. We have the Indiana Safe Routes to School Partnership. We have our Indiana Complete Streets Coalition and our Indiana Walks, which is a pedestrian work group that works on pedestrian safety and other pedestrian issues. You can reach us at healthbydesignonline.org for more information. So what we're talking about today is the Marion County Transit Referendum, which was approved by Marion County voters on November 8th at 59.3% of voters approved that. So that's a pretty wide margin, and it's this is the first dedicated source of funding solely for transit that we've seen in our city's history. It's a major change. It's the biggest change to the Indigo. It will be the biggest change to the Indigo service, the public transit agency here in town, in over 30 years. So this is a really big opportunity for us, and we're really excited about it. So this is the ballot question that was actually on November 8th ballot. What is in black was actually dictated by the state legislature. The state sort of micromanaged how how the county was able to phrase the question. What is in red is actually what we were allowed locally to insert. You have the tax rate of 0.25%. And then you have the description of the project at the latter half of the sentence. So just to make sure that everybody understands, this was an advisory referendum. So even though it had passed on November 8th at 59.3%, it still has to be, the tax has to be enacted by the city county council. And what that entails is there's more to the process than this, so I'll get into that in just a moment. So in layman's terms, this was a 0.25% income tax, so that's 25 cents per $100 of income, a little under $10 a month per household, to fund improvements envisioned in the Marion County Transit Plan, which you can find at indigo.net. What this plan involved was shorter wait times between buses, so greater frequency. 10 to 15 minutes was the shortest wait times between buses that we are anticipating in the plan. 3 rapid transit lines, so the blue line, purple line, and red line. Actually, the red line is already on its way to being funded through a small starts grant, a federal small starts grant of $75 million. And it also has local match secured for those capital costs. But the Marion County Transit Referendum funds will help offset some of those operating costs and actually help with the extension of the red line to the county lines eventually. This referendum will enable the bus service to run every route every day. Currently, we have a pretty inconsistent bus schedule here in Marion County, and we have for a long time. It's pretty even throughout the week, but then once you get to the weekend, some of those routes fall off because there's not enough funding to run them. Longer hours, so every route will run about 20 hours per weekday. So Monday through Friday, the bus routes will run from 5 a.m. to 1 a.m. and extended hours on the weekend as well. And there will be easier transfers, especially on the east side of the city. I'll show you some maps in the next couple slides, but currently we have a hub and spoke system where if you are riding the bus, you have to, depending on where you are in the city, you have to go downtown to make a transfer. This for most routes. This will enable, because there's a more grid-like system, more frequent grid-like system for riders to make those transfers outside of the downtown area. So this is our 2016 Indigo system. As you can see, the colored lines represent frequency, and we currently only have two 15-minute routes, and we have several 30-minute routes and many 60 minutes or more routes, so routes that run every hour or longer. We have a lot of that green, and what we're really trying to do with this referendum was get it to be more of a frequent network. So that doesn't mean that we're going to have no hour-long routes. We're just going to have a lot less of them. We're increasing the number of 30-minute frequencies as well as 15-minute frequencies. There's a vast difference between those two maps, especially on the east side of the city. The thicker red lines are actually those rapid lines that I was describing earlier. You have the red line running down the center of the city, north and south. You have the purple line on the east side of the city, running from Lawrence Township to downtown, which is already a heavily trafficked bus line currently. And then you have the blue line, which runs from east and west out to the airport. So the highest frequency for those rapid lines would be 10 minutes. When it comes to authorization to enable us, Marion County, to put the question on the ballot this past November, we had to seek state authorization. So we worked with a diverse coalition of partners to authorize 6 eligible counties in central Indiana to place a public question on the general election ballot. This would ask voters to permit the county to impose a county economic development income tax rate not to exceed 0.25%. And like I said, it's for 6 counties in the central region, but Marion County by law has to be the first region to go. So this not only has implications for Marion County, but it has great implications for 5 other central Indiana counties, and it's a great precedent for us in general in the center part of the state, but also statewide. So once we were able to achieve that state authorizing legislation in the first quarter of 2014, we did a lot of planning, and in the meantime, before we launched our campaign for the city council to actually certify the referendum, and that started between March and May of 2016. So that was Proposition 145, and we worked locally with a lot of similar partners that helped us at the State House to rally support for that certifying the referendum. So there were 3 lanes. I like to refer to them as 3 lanes of partners that were working to advance the Marion County Transit referendum, or at least the Marion County Transit Plan. So you had a lot of these partners have worked together you know, in the past, have established relationships, so it was really easy to work with each other prior to the referendum being certified. Once the referendum was certified, the folks in the first column, Indy Connect, Central Indiana's Transit Initiative, are all public agencies. So these agencies are only allowed to educate and engage the public. So you have the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization, who really created the Marion County Transit Plan and actually the Central Indiana Transit Plan, which is a larger document for those 5 other counties. And then you have the Central Indiana Regional Transportation Authority, otherwise known as CIRTA, which does a lot of workforce connectors and sort of supplements the existing public transit, which is the Indianapolis Public Transit Corporation, otherwise known as Indigo. So those are the 3 entities that really did a lot of the legwork for educating the public over the years, and I'll get into that timeline in just a moment. Then you have the Keep Indy Moving Forward Political Action Committee. So these were folks, you know, they did a lot of the campaign fundraising and advocacy, a lot of things that obviously the public agencies couldn't do, and then the next batch of organizations were not, many of them were not able to do that because of their nonprofits. So the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce and the Mid-Indiana Board of Realtors really took the lead on the Political Action Committee, working with the campaign side of things and doing the fundraising with the business community. And then you have Transit Drives Indy, and this whole presentation is sort of branded as a Transit Drives Indy presentation, but that was the grassroots wing of the campaign that worked, you know, in the neighborhoods with residents, educating and advocating for the Marion County Transit referendum and sort of answering those questions of, you know, how will the bus line affect me? How will the network affect me? And I'll talk about how diverse that group was in just a moment. So the Indy Connect agencies, you know, Indy Connect, this initiative was one of the largest public outreach campaigns in the region's history. It started in 2008 and is ongoing today. They've reached over 150,000 residents at hundreds of local events and festivals. There have been over 300,000 visits to indyconnect.org. 75,000 visitors to the Indy Connect Day at the Indiana State Fair, started in 2010, and then more than 10,000 public comments were actually incorporated into the Marion County Transit Plan. So they did their due diligence and going out and contacting residents and ensuring that the public was informed about the plan and that their feedback was incorporated and reflected in the plan. This year alone, they were at 650 events, reaching over 15,000 individuals. So Indy Connect, hats off to them because they did a lot of work advancing this issue, or at least educating the public on the issue, so that the public knew what they were going to be voting on. The Keep Indy Moving Forward Political Action Committee, they did the bulk of the fundraising and polling. There were 2 local campaign managers who had prior legislative campaign experience and were actually working on, you know, campaigns parallel to this transit campaign. They worked with the business community to finance all of the Keep Indy Moving Forward materials and, you know, events and things like that. So they created thousands of yard signs, hundreds of T-shirts. There were 7 pieces of direct mail. There were phone calls made for polling. 24 billboards were put up across the city, and there were several radio ads talking about the transit referendum. And a lot of the materials that were created were handed off to grassroots supporters in the Transit Drives Indy coalition to educate and engage the community. So Transit Drives Indy, it was made up of a diverse group of organizations across Marion County which seek to educate voters on the benefits of public transportation and advocate in support of the transit referendum. We have a variety of groups such as the Central Indiana Community Foundation, Hoosier Environmental Council, even includes some of the campaign folks, the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce and the Mid-Indiana Board of Realtors. The Indianapolis Congregation Action Network was very significant in doing a lot of outreach through faith-based institutions, reaching a lot of minority groups and low-income individuals. Bosma Enterprises was, and Socoa Aging and In-Home Solutions were critical, working with the disability community, and also we had Indie Hub, which was our young professionals group. So we even had AARP Indiana involved in the coalition as well. So as you can see, that the transit is such a broad underlying issue, and it unifies so many different groups. Rarely do you see a Chamber of Commerce advocating for a tax increase or working besides, an environmental group, or the young professionals group working next to a seniors group. So this is a really diverse coalition, and this issue really unified a lot of our work. So the coalition started in June of 2016, and we had weekly meetings from then out. We kind of worked on a pretty quick timeline, actually. If I could do it all over again, I would say that we would have started 6 months prior to really working on our individual grassroots work. So we had 10 targeted community conversations in council districts with more than 100 other presentations. Our website had a listserv of supporters, 530 individuals, 61 organizations, 60 businesses. It's estimated that we had 1,500 direct conversations. Like I mentioned before, the Indianapolis Congregation Action Network, or IndyCan, they had launched sort of a sub-campaign called Ticket to Opportunity, and they did a lot of, they provided the infrastructure for phone banking. So a lot of the partners from Transit Drives Indy and volunteers, citizens, were able to engage other voters. They had a voter bank of contact information. They used an automatic dialer to reach those voters and assess if they were going to be voting on November 8th, and secondly, if they were willing to support the transit referendum. So we engaged hundreds of volunteers on Election Day. We did a lot of outreach for that. We had a volunteer at 105 priority polling places. I think we have about 150, 160 polling sites in the city. So we tried to cover them as best as we could with the volunteers we had. So just to quickly go over some of the messaging materials that were helpful for us, we had sample ballots that we handed out at public events showing where the public question would be on the ballot with a nice bold arrow pointing to where it's located. We used a lot of the public agency materials to educate voters. So we had the mini copies of the Marion County Transit Plan that had facts, but also the maps available. And then the lower piece with the gentleman holding the child, that was a direct mail piece that went out to, I think it went out to, it was a majority of voters. I don't have the exact number, but it went out to the majority of voters in the county, informing them that the question was actually going to be on the ballot. And then the little piece up in the upper right-hand corner, the Vote Yes for, and then it lists all the benefits. That was a palm card that we had volunteers hand out on Election Day. So that was really important, getting people out on Election Day. It was surprising to how many voters did not know about the transit referendum. So you can do as much planning and media buys as you want, but there's nothing as impactful as just reaching voters, when they're on their way into the polling place. Of course, there's legal restrictions of how close you can be to the polling place entrance, but we made sure that we complied with the law. Social media was really important with our campaign. These are a couple social media pieces that my organization put together. The one on the left is more of informative, just talking about what the tax would pay for. It's only a quarter for every $100 you earn. This is what it buys you, and it reminds folks to go out and vote on Election Day. Then on the right side, we had, I think we did 4 of these. These were more testimonials that we took quotes from writers or family members of writers and featured those and pushed those out over Facebook and Twitter. The one on the left actually we reached over 24,000 people with that, and that was actually for all the social media. We made sure that we boosted our posts and paid for all of our social media placements to reach as many people as possible. So lessons learned. I'm sure my list will be longer than this at some point, once I do some more reflecting on the campaign. But overall, there was some general confusion with the red line, and there continues to be confusion with the red line. That's the one bus rapid transit line which is already funded through a federal small starts grant, or will be once Congress appropriates those funds. But a lot of folks thought that they were going to be voting on the red line, but really they weren't really voting on the red line, just a small part of it, maybe a small part of the operating funds, but they were really voting on increasing increasing the network to be more frequent and run longer hours. We made sure that the public agencies made sure that they educated the media early. You can do as much educating as you'd like, but still the media will still get some of the facts wrong, unfortunately. I know that I believe the public agencies reached out to the 16 separate media companies, educating them on the plan and what the tax was, but there was still some confusion out there. Keep the brand simple. There's a lot of different brands going around. Indie Connect was like I said, it started in 2008, so that was very much associated with the transit plan. Then there's Indigo. Then you've got the Central Indiana Regional Transportation Authority. Then you've got Transit Drives Indy. You've got the Political Action Committee. You've got Ticket to Opportunity, which was the Indianapolis Congregation Action Network's sort of sub-campaign. So really, if I could go back, I would love for everyone to coalesce under a single umbrella brand, but as you can do that as legally permissible, try and consolidate all of those under one name. And then transparency and trust equals success. So don't operate behind a smokescreen. Make sure that information that can be shared with the group is, because that leads to trust and success within a coalition. And then also plan early for Election Day. Like I mentioned before, Election Day was critical to our success, and it proved to be. So next steps for us, like I said, this was an advisory referendum, so we're going to shift our focus to the City County Council to enact the tax. Once it's introduced to the full council, it will go to at least one one committee hearing, and then it will go back to the full council for a final vote. Councilor decisions to support the full tax rate are contingent on how the vote broke down in their district. So you have some councilors that won't waver on this. They've been diehard advocates and will support the transit measure regardless, but you have others that really wanted to see how their voters how their constituents voted for it. And I've seen some of those preliminary results, and it looks pretty good for us. We're well over the majority, but you know, nothing's guaranteed, so we're going to do our best to educate and engage those counselors. And then we're also asking volunteers and supporters to stay engaged throughout early 2017 and keep the pressure on the council to see this tax rate through. And that's it for me. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at my email address there. Give me a call. Like I said, we're not only working on issues in Marion County, but we work across the state to increase investment in transit. But yeah, this has been it's been a really exciting journey throughout the ensuring the Marion County Transit referendum passed, and we're looking forward to the next several months. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Addison. That was terrific information, and congratulations to you, to both Addison and to Abigail on fantastic victories. Really terrific wins. I do have a number of questions for both of you, but let me sort of try to summarize some of the questions that have come in from the audience into a couple of broad questions and give you both a crack at it. There have been several people who asked specifically about the efficacy, the legality, the challenges, all of that associated with coordinating with the transit agency, and particularly in obtaining emails and information and mailings and so on. So could either or both of you speak a little bit to your relationship with the transit agency as part of the campaign process?
Yeah, I think this is pretty simple. The transit agency and the campaign could not communicate or work together or coordinate in any way. So we did not. We did public records requests for various pieces of information that we thought would be helpful. Sound Transit had put together materials that we were able to use, but we did not coordinate or could not coordinate in any way.
Yeah, and similarly with Marion County, we were not able to coordinate with the public agencies after the referendum was certified by council. Prior to that, though, we were able to request information, and we had existing relationships with the public agencies for a long time. The grassroots supporters working with the transit agencies and the Metropolitan Planning Organization. I mean, these are community institutions that we tried to maintain a good relationship with. But yeah, like Abigail had referenced, there were instances with public record requests and FOIA things. So you can get that information from public agencies if you need to, but by and large, we did not coordinate, or we did not coordinate at all after the referendum was certified.
Great, thanks. Here's a question again for both of you about economic data that you used in the campaign, particularly economic data to show elected officials where the economic return would come from things like job growth related to transit construction or transit operating jobs. Did you have that sort of data? And if you did, where did you get it? How did you derive that information? How did you deliver it to elected officials?
Yeah, so it's sort of funny. My communications director moved here from Michigan, and he was like, everybody is so obsessed with numbers here. And it was sort of like a good reminder that we didn't necessarily need to be, I think most voters don't necessarily need to go into the weeds, but for elected officials, actually Sound Transit put together in their package of putting the package together, they had some pretty good information about job growth and that type of thing. In our region, there's also the Puget Sound Regional Council, and it's an agency that exists in 4 counties here to provide demographic information, job growth data, employment, and growth information, and that's where most of our data came from.
Yeah, so the grassroots and sort of the campaign didn't really do a lot of the financial projections and economic benefits of the transit plan, but the Metropolitan Planning Organization did a lot of that. They did an economic study, and they incorporated a lot of their projections in the Marion County Transit Plan. So that information was made public, and we used that to our benefit, definitely when we were informing the elected officials, but also the public.
Great. So question for Addison about how your campaign was funded, and a related one that was for you, Abigail. You talked about the budget, but what were the funding sources, and how was the staffing decision, those staffing decisions made?
You cut out there at the end, but I can answer the first part of the question.
Sorry.
So the Political Action Committee worked with a lot of their membership. So the Mid-Indiana Board of Realtors worked with their membership at the national level to secure funding for the campaign, but you also had the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce working with local businesses and big contributors to political campaigns to secure that funding. It was $600,000 was used for from the Political Action Committee, and certain funding was used for the grassroots activities. Some of the grassroots activities were funded through the Community Foundation here in Indianapolis.
Yeah, so our original budget, we intended to raise between $3 and $3.5 million, and we hired a fundraiser in the area. She does a lot of national fundraising and local races for the governor, and we hired her to come on board to do all the nitty-gritty necessary to raise the money. But really, Dow Constantine, our county executive, did most of the heavy lifting on fundraising. So we raised, labor stepped up a lot. We raised about $1 million from labor. The business community, I think they're at about $1.5 million. Engineering firms, individual contributions. Microsoft pitched in about $350,000. Large companies in the area also stepped up. So that was great.
Terrific. Well, I think we're going to leave it there. I appreciate everybody hanging with us, and I want to say a special word of thanks to Addison and Abigail. Terrific information on your campaigns. Again, congratulations on your success. If you are interested in more details on some of the other races around the country, do check out the CFD website or contact us at cfd.org with any questions that you may have. There are a number of questions that we weren't able to get to. We'll circle back with you on those requests. And just want to thank everybody for joining us today and for engaging with us around what was a very interesting and indeed historic year for transportation ballot measures. So on behalf of CFTE and my fellow panelists, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much.